All right, stop whatever you're doing. Put down that overpriced latte. Pause that Netflix show about nothing. Close whatever social media app is currently rotting your brain. It's Saturday, January 17th, 2026, and I need to talk to you about something that's happening right now, this very second, while you're pretending the weekend means your problems take a break. Spoiler alert, they don't. I'm William Lee, and unlike every suit-wearing, teleprompter-reading financial expert you see on television, I actually give a damn about whether you understand what's happening to your money. I'm not here to sell you a mutual fund with a 2% expense ratio. I'm not here to convince you that everything's fine, and you should just keep trusting the system. I'm here because I rebelled against the elite financial establishment years ago when I realized they were playing a completely different game than the one they tell you exists. And if you want to keep receiving reality checks from someone who's not on Wall Street's payroll, hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to explain to you is information they desperately don't want going mainstream. Here's the thing nobody's talking about while you're enjoying your Saturday. The dollar, that piece of paper in your wallet that you've been brainwashed since childhood to worship like it's actually valuable, is dying. Not might die someday, not could potentially decline in the future, is dying. Right now, this moment, while the stock market is closed and CNBC is running reruns and your financial advisor is playing golf. The dollar doesn't take weekends off from losing value. The debasement doesn't pause for your convenience. The Federal Reserve's money printer doesn't shut down just because normal people aren't allowed to trade stocks on Saturday. While you're scrolling through Instagram looking at photos of food you're not eating and vacations you're not taking, your purchasing power is evaporating like water in the desert. And silver? Silver is gaining value. Not on some chart. You won't see a green candle because markets are closed and apparently real value only counts when a computer says so. But in reality, in the actual physical world where things matter, silver is becoming more valuable every single second. Because every moment the Fed creates another $1 billion out of thin air, your existing dollars become worth less, and hard assets like silver become worth more. This isn't some conspiracy theory I cooked up in my basement. This is mathematical certainty. This is physics. This is the law of supply and demand applied to money itself. And if you don't understand what I'm about to show you, you're going to be financially destroyed when this house of cards finally collapses. Let me show you something that should fundamentally rewire your brain about money. I'm looking at official Federal Reserve data right now, not some sketchy website, not some anonymous blogger, but the actual published numbers from the Fed itself. And what these numbers show should make you physically uncomfortable. In October 2025, there were $2,215 trillion in physical currency circulating in the economy. But here's where your worldview needs to shatter. In 2020, during the pandemic, when the government decided the solution to economic problems was to just print money like we're playing Monopoly, the Federal Reserve printed 20% of all dollars that had ever existed up to that point. 20% in 1 year. Let me put this in terms even a golden retriever could understand. Imagine you spent your entire life collecting rare Pokemon cards. You have cards worth thousands because they're scarce. And then overnight, Nintendo decides to print 20% more of every card you own and floods the market. What happens to your collection's value? It crashes harder than your cousin's cryptocurrency portfolio in 2022. That's exactly what happened to every dollar you owned in 2020. The government decided your savings needed to be 20% less valuable, not because you did anything wrong, not because you made bad decisions, but because they needed to pay for things they couldn't afford, and the easiest solution was to make your money worth less. But wait, it gets so much worse that you might want to sit down if you're not already. That wasn't a one-time emergency measure. That wasn't some unique pandemic response that ended when vaccines rolled out. The printing continued. The money creation accelerated. Look at the chart. From 2020 through 2025, the line goes nearly vertical like a rocket ship to economic disaster. We went from around $800 billion in circulation in 2010 to over $2.4 trillion by late 2025. That's a tripling in 15 years. Your dollars lost 2/3 of their relative scarcity in a decade and a half. And the acceleration is what should terrify you. Because when things accelerate, it means the problem is getting worse, not better. It means the system is becoming more desperate, not more stable. It means we're approaching the end game. And here's the part that's going to really bake your noodle. They're going to keep printing. They have absolutely no choice. The United States government is running deficits measured in trillions, with a T every single year. The national debt just crossed 35 trillion and it's climbing faster than a SpaceX rocket. Social security obligations that were promised to boomers, Medicare commitments, government pensions, military spending that exceeds the next 10 countries combined, infrastructure promises that politicians make to get elected, all of it requires money that doesn't exist. So where does that money come from? Does it materialize from the ether through hard work and fiscal responsibility? No. It gets printed. It gets created digitally with a keystroke. It gets conjured out of nothing by central bankers in expensive suits who use polite academic language to disguise the simple truth. They're debasing your currency to pay bills they can't afford. They call it quantitative easing. They call it accommodative monetary policy. They call it maintaining liquidity in the financial system. I call it what it actually is: theft. Legalized, institutionalized theft of your purchasing power. And you can't do anything about it because it's not technically illegal when the government does it. You know what happens when this bubble finally explodes? Because it will explode. Not if. When. Every fiat currency in human history has eventually failed. Not most of them, not the poorly managed ones. All of them. Every single one. From the Roman denarius to the French assignat to the German Reichsmark to the Zimbabwean dollar. 100% failure rate over a long enough timeline. The average lifespan of a fiat currency is about 27 years before it either collapses completely or gets replaced. The dollar has been a pure fiat currency, completely disconnected from gold, backed by nothing except government promises, since Nixon closed the gold window in 1971. We're now 55 years into this experiment. We're living on borrowed time with a monetary system that's already twice as old as the average fiat currency lifespan. And the cracks aren't just showing, they're becoming chasms. When this bubble explodes, when the world finally loses confidence in the dollar's ability to store value, when people realize the emperor has no clothes and the currency has no backing, the panic will make 2008 look like a minor inconvenience. Gold will go to $8,000 per ounce, probably more. Maybe $10,000 or $12,000 if the crisis is severe enough, which it probably will be given how much worse our fundamentals are now than they've ever been. And silver will hit $800 per ounce. Maybe higher. These aren't random numbers I pulled out of thin air to get clicks. These are calculations based on historical ratios, on what happens during monetary resets, on what occurs when currencies collapse and people frantically flee to hard assets that can't be printed. When the Weimar Republic collapsed in Germany in the 1920s, the people who held gold and silver survived with their wealth intact. The people who held paper marks, the ones who trusted the government, who believed the officials saying everything was fine, became destitute overnight. Their life savings evaporated, their pensions vanished, their government bonds became worthless pieces of paper suitable only for wallpaper or kindling. The same thing happened in Zimbabwe when Robert Mugabe printed money like it was going out of style, which it literally was. The same thing happened in Venezuela when socialism met the money printer. The same thing happened in Argentina multiple times because apparently they enjoy the experience. The same thing happened in Yugoslavia, in Hungary, in Bolivia, in every country that thought they could print their way to prosperity. Every single time a government prints too much money, every single time debt becomes mathematically unpayable, every single time the central bank tries to inflate its way out of a crisis, the result is identical. The currency dies, and hard assets soar to levels that seem impossible until they happen. So let me ask you a very direct question, and I want you to actually think about this instead of just scrolling past it. Why do you think China is buying every ounce of silver they can physically acquire? Why do you think the Chinese government has made precious metals accumulation a strategic national priority? Why do you think they're buying gold at record rates through their central bank while simultaneously encouraging their citizens to do the same? I'll tell you exactly why, and it's not because they're stupid or superstitious or stuck in the past. It's because China understands something that most Americans have completely forgotten. Real wealth is measured in things, not in paper promises. Real wealth is tangible. Real wealth can't be printed or digitally created or conjured with a computer keystroke. China is systematically building their economic foundation on tangible assets: silver, gold, copper, rare earth elements, infrastructure, manufacturing capacity, real productive capability. They're not building their wealth on financial derivatives that nobody understands, or credit default swaps that nearly destroyed the global economy in 2008, or mortgage-backed securities that are just repackaged debt. Meanwhile, what is the United States building its economy on? Dollars, paper, digital entries in banking computer systems, promises backed by absolutely nothing except the full faith and credit of a government that's $35 trillion in debt, and adding more every single day like a gambling addict who thinks the next bet will fix everything. The dollar is backed by faith, your belief that it will be accepted tomorrow, your trust that the system won't collapse, your hope that the government knows what it's doing, but faith is fragile, trust is brittle, hope is not a strategy. And when faith breaks in a monetary system, it doesn't crack slowly, it shatters in an instant. Let me explain why silver specifically is in such an absurdly unique position right now, and why I genuinely believe that holding physical silver is one of the smartest hedges you can possibly make. Notice I said hedge, not investment. Notice I said physical, not paper certificates or ETFs. And notice I'm not giving you financial advice because I'm not your advisor and you need to make your own damn decisions like an adult. But I am going to share the facts, the data, and the logical conclusions that I've reached after years of studying how monetary systems collapse and how smart people protect themselves when they do. Silver is becoming scarce, not in some distant future scenario. Right now, today, the world has been running a silver deficit, meaning global consumption exceeds global production, for 6 consecutive years. Every single year, we mine less silver than the world uses. Every year, the gap gets wider. Where does the shortfall come from? From above-ground stockpiles, from existing inventories, from reserves built up over decades when silver was cheaper and less critical to modern technology. And those stockpiles are being systematically drawn down. They're being depleted, and they're not infinite. Eventually, they'll be gone. When those inventories are exhausted, the market will have to reprice silver at whatever level is necessary to either crush demand or incentivize massive new supply. And given that modern technology literally cannot function without silver, crushing demand isn't really an option unless we want to abandon the entire green energy transition and go back to living in caves. But here's the problem that makes the situation even more explosive. You can't just turn on new silver supply like flipping a light switch. Mining is a decade-long process. From initial discovery to geological surveys to feasibility studies to environmental permitting to financing to development to actual production, you're looking at 5 to 10 years minimum. And that's in a best-case scenario with a friendly regulatory environment and no community opposition. In the current environment, with ESG concerns, with environmental regulations written by people who've never seen a mine, with permitting delays that make the DMV look efficient, with NIMBY activists fighting every project, it can take even longer. Some projects that were approved years ago still aren't producing. So even if silver gaps to $200 or $300 per ounce tomorrow, and mining companies decide it's absolutely worth developing new projects, those projects won't produce a single ounce of new silver until 2030 or later. That creates a window, a perfect storm window of several years where demand is accelerating and supply physically cannot keep up. And in commodity markets, those windows are where prices go absolutely parabolic. Now let's talk about demand, because this is where the story goes from compelling to absolutely insane. Silver isn't just a monetary metal that central banks might buy or that doomsday preppers might hoard. Silver is an industrial metal that modern civilization cannot function without. There is no substitute for most applications. None. Zero. Solar panels require silver. There is no other conductor that works as efficiently in photovoltaic cells. Electric vehicles require significantly more silver than traditional combustion engines. The electronics, the battery management systems, the charging infrastructure, all of it needs silver. 5G networks that everyone's so excited about, they require massive amounts of silver. Semiconductor manufacturing that makes your iPhone possible needs silver. Medical applications, antibacterial treatments, wound dressings, medical devices require silver because of its unique antimicrobial properties. The green energy transition that every government in the world has committed to, regardless of whether it's realistic or not, requires staggering amounts of silver. The electrification of transportation requires silver. The digitization of everything requires silver. The smart grid infrastructure requires silver. This isn't optional demand that disappears if the economy slows down or if there's a recession. This is structural demand baked into the infrastructure plans of every major economy for the next 20 years. And here's the absolute kicker that should make your brain explode, that industrial demand is completely separate from investment demand. Right now, investment demand for silver is relatively modest. Most people don't own any silver at all. Most investment portfolios have exactly zero exposure to precious metals. Your financial advisor probably doesn't even mention it because he makes no commission on physical metal. But what happens when the public wakes up? What happens when the average person finally realizes their dollars are losing value and they need to protect their purchasing power? What happens when silver goes from being an obscure niche asset that only weird conspiracy theorists talk about to being a mainstream topic on financial news? The investment demand that floods in during those moments can completely dwarf the industrial demand. In 2011, when silver briefly hit $50 per ounce, the retail buying frenzy was so intense that mints around the world literally couldn't keep up. Premiums on physical silver coins went to $10, $15, even $20 over spot price. Delivery delays stretched to weeks or months. Dealers ran out of inventory. Some stopped taking orders entirely. And that was with silver at $50 after a steady, gradual climb over several years. Imagine what happens if silver gaps to $100 or $150 in a matter of weeks because of a currency crisis or a supply shock or a short squeeze in the paper markets. Imagine the scramble for physical metal when everyone simultaneously realizes they need protection. The panic would be unlike anything we've ever seen in precious metals. And once the supply chain breaks, once the mints physically run out, once the dealers have nothing left to sell, once the refineries can't produce bars fast enough, price becomes completely irrelevant because you cannot buy what does not exist. That's when you see rationing. That's when you see governments imposing export restrictions to keep domestic supply. That's when you see premiums explode to 50% or 100% or more over spot. Now let me address the elephant in the room, the question I can feel some of you thinking through the screen. If this is also obvious, if the dollar is really being debased and silver is really becoming scarce, why isn't everyone talking about it? Why isn't this on the front page of every newspaper? Why aren't financial advisors at Morgan Stanley recommending it? Why isn't your uncle at Thanksgiving bringing it up? Excellent question. Let me answer it in a way that might upset some people, but truth doesn't care about your feelings. First, the financial system profits massively from you staying in dollars and traditional investments. Banks make money when you keep deposits. They literally profit from your ignorance. Brokerages make money when you trade stocks and bonds and mutual funds with fees and commissions and spreads. The government benefits enormously when you hold currency because it makes their debt easier to manage and allows them to keep inflating. Nobody in the established financial system has any incentive whatsoever to tell you to exit dollars and buy hard assets. That would be like expecting McDonald's to recommend you stop eating fast food and start growing vegetables. It goes against their entire business model. They need you in the system, not outside it. Second, most financial professionals are products of the system. They went to the same business schools where they learned from the same textbooks written by the same economists who have never made a successful trade in their lives. They were taught that inflation is always manageable, that central banks are competent technocrats who know what they're doing, that fiat currency is the pinnacle of monetary evolution. They genuinely believe this stuff because they've never studied what happens when these systems fail. They've never lived through a currency collapse. They've never experienced hyperinflation. They think it can't happen here because they've been conditioned to believe American exceptionalism extends to monetary policy. They think we're special, we're different. The rules don't apply to us. Spoiler alert, we're not special, and the rules absolutely apply to us. Third, cognitive dissonance. It's psychologically much easier to believe the system is fine than to confront the terrifying possibility that everything you've been told your entire life is wrong. It's easier to trust that the experts have it under control than to accept that we're in completely uncharted territory with debt levels never before seen in human history. So most people don't want to hear it, they don't want to think about it, they don't want to consider it. They want to believe their 401k will be fine, their Social Security will be there when they retire, their dollars will still buy groceries in 20 years. They want to believe the government will fix it, the Fed will figure it out, smart people somewhere are handling this. But wishful thinking doesn't change reality, and the reality, the cold, hard, mathematical reality, is that we are living through the late stages of a monetary experiment that is showing every single warning sign of catastrophic failure. The dollar is losing value, not might lose value someday, not could potentially decline, is losing value right now, today, this very second while you're reading this on your Saturday, while the markets are closed, while you're living your life pretending everything's normal. And silver, along with gold and other hard assets, is gaining value. Not on a chart that you check obsessively, not in nominal dollar terms that make you feel good, but in real terms, in purchasing power, in its ability to actually preserve wealth across time and through crises. Because silver can't be printed. Silver can't be digitally created by Jerome Powell pressing a button. Silver is a physical element with a genuinely finite supply, and that scarcity is what gives it value in a world drowning in infinite money printing. So what do I want you to do with this information? First, I want you to understand that I'm not telling you to panic. I'm not telling you to liquidate your entire 401k on Monday morning and buy silver with cash. I'm not giving you specific financial advice because I don't know your situation, your goals, your risk tolerance, or your timeline. What I'm telling you is to think, to question, to educate yourself, to stop blindly trusting the same institutions that caused the 2008 financial crisis, that printed 20% of all dollars in 1 year, that told you inflation was transitory before it hit 9%. Look at the chart of currency and circulation that I'm showing you. Look at the trajectory. Look at the exponential acceleration. And ask yourself honestly, does this look sustainable? Does this look like a healthy, stable monetary system? Or does this look like a system that's running on borrowed time, held together by faith and inertia? Then look at silver. Look at the supply-demand fundamentals that I just explained. Look at the industrial uses that make it critical to modern technology. Look at the historical role it's played as money for literally thousands of years across dozens of civilizations. Look at what China is doing, because China doesn't do things for no reason. Look at what other smart money is quietly accumulating. And ask yourself, does it make sense to have at least some exposure to an asset that can't be printed and has intrinsic value? I'm not saying put your entire net worth into silver. I'm not saying bet everything on one asset class. I'm not saying go full tinfoil hat and move to a bunker in Montana. I'm saying consider whether having some physical metal, whether it's silver coins, whether it's small bars, whether it's whatever form you can actually take physical possession of, makes sense as a hedge, as insurance, as protection for you and your family in a worst-case scenario. Because here's what I know with absolute certainty based on thousands of years of human history. If the dollar collapses, if we have a currency crisis, if confidence breaks and the system resets, the people who hold physical precious metals will be in an infinitely better position than the people who hold nothing but paper promises and digital account balances. That's not speculation. That's not theory. That's not doom and gloom fear-mongering. That's history. That's what has happened every single time throughout human civilization when a currency fails. Every time, without exception. And I want to be crystal clear about something because I know how this sounds. I'm not rooting for a collapse. I'm not hoping for chaos. I'm not some accelerationist who wants to watch the world burn. I would much prefer a world where the dollar remains stable, where governments are fiscally responsible, where central banks don't print money like drunken sailors, where your savings maintain their value. But hoping for that world and actually living in that world are two completely different things. And the data, the cold, hard, objective data published by the Federal Reserve itself, tells me we're not in that world. We're in a world where the money supply has more than tripled in 15 years. We're in a world where government debt is growing faster than GDP. We're in a world where the solution to every crisis is to print more money and hope somehow this time it works out differently. So the question isn't whether you believe me or whether you agree with my analysis or whether you like my delivery. The question is, what are you going to do to protect yourself if I'm right? What's your plan B if the dollar loses half its value over the next 5 years? What's your hedge if inflation comes roaring back and your paycheck can't keep up with the cost of groceries? What's your insurance policy if we have a monetary reset and paper assets get restructured or defaulted on or inflated away into irrelevance? For me, part of that answer is physical silver. Not all of my strategy. I'm not a one-asset person and diversification matters. But physical silver is a meaningful part of my protection plan because I understand that it has properties paper assets simply don't have. It's tangible. I can hold it in my hand. It's portable. I can move it if I need to. It has thousands of years of monetary history backing its role as money. It has industrial demand that creates a fundamental floor under its value. And most importantly, it's scarce in a way that dollars never will be and can never be. Now let me give you some practical guidance because education without action is just entertainment. If you're seriously thinking about acquiring some physical silver after everything I've explained, here's what you actually need to know. First, understand premiums. When you buy physical silver coins or bars, you don't pay spot price. You pay spot plus a premium. That premium covers the cost of refining, minting, distribution, dealer markup, and profit. Premiums vary dramatically based on the product, the dealer, the quantity you're buying, and current market conditions. In normal times with healthy supply, you might pay $3 to $5 per ounce over spot for common government coins like silver eagles or maples. In times of high demand, when everyone suddenly wants physical metal, premiums can explode to $10, $15, or even $20 per ounce. That premium is not arbitrary. It reflects actual supply and demand for physical metal as opposed to paper contracts. Second, decide what form makes sense for your situation. Silver eagles, Canadian maples, British Britannias. These are government-minted coins with high recognition and excellent liquidity. They're easy to sell when you eventually need to. The downside is they carry higher premiums because of that government backing and recognition. Silver rounds, privately minted discs that look like coins but aren't legal tender, carry lower premiums but may be slightly harder to sell to some buyers. Silver bars, especially larger ones like 100-ounce bars, have the lowest premiums per ounce, but are obviously less divisible. You can't exactly break off a chunk to buy groceries if things really go sideways. Think carefully about what makes sense for your specific situation and goals. If you're buying as disaster insurance, smaller denominations make more sense. If you're buying as wealth preservation, larger bars might be more efficient. Third, and this is critical, storage. If you're going to hold physical silver, you absolutely must have a plan for where it's going to be. Some people keep it at home in a safe bolted to the foundation. Some people use safe deposit boxes at banks, though there are legitimate concerns about access if the banking system has problems. Some people use private vault storage facilities. There's no perfect answer. Every option has trade-offs between accessibility, security, and cost. The point is to have an actual plan, and not just stack silver in a shoebox in your closet, where it might get stolen during a burglary, or where your family members might not even know it exists if something happens to you. And speaking of family, let me address something that's both funny and deadly serious. There's a joke in the precious metals community that goes like this. When silver was cheap and you were buying it, your spouse thought you were crazy. When silver starts running and making gains, suddenly it becomes our silver. And when silver goes parabolic and you're sitting on massive profits, it magically becomes my silver. The joke points to a real issue that you need to address. Have the conversation now. Make sure the people close to you understand why you're holding these assets, what the plan is, what role they play in your overall financial picture, and what the goals are. Because the absolute worst time to have that conversation is when silver hits $200 and suddenly everyone in your household has strong opinions about what you should do with it. The best time is right now, when things are relatively calm, when you can explain the reasoning clearly without emotion, when you can set proper expectations, and when you can make sure everyone understands this is a long-term hedge against monetary instability, not a get-rich-quick scheme or a day trading opportunity. Now let me zoom back out to the macro picture one more time because I want you to fully understand the forces at play here that go way beyond just silver prices. We're living through a fundamental transition in the global monetary order. The post-World War II system, dominated by US dollar hegemony, is fragmenting. It's not collapsing overnight in some dramatic Hollywood fashion. These transitions typically take years or even decades, but the process has clearly and undeniably begun. You can see it in China's aggressive efforts to internationalize the yuan and settle trade in their own currency instead of dollars. You can see it in the BRICS nations actively developing alternative payment systems to bypass SWIFT. You can see it in Saudi Arabia, our supposed ally, now selling oil in multiple currencies, including yuan. You can see it in Europe's push for a digital euro that could eventually reduce dependence on dollar clearing systems. Most importantly, you can see it in central banks around the world buying gold at absolutely record rates and aggressively diversifying their reserves away from dollar-heavy portfolios. When central banks, the institutions run by the smartest monetary economists and policymakers, are diversifying away from dollars into hard assets, that should tell you something important. All of these developments point to the same underlying reality that anyone paying attention can see. The world is systematically losing confidence in dollar hegemony, not because they hate America or because of politics or because of some anti-Western ideology, but because the fundamental math doesn't work anymore. You cannot run trillion-dollar deficits forever without consequences. You cannot print trillions of dollars without eventually destroying the currency's value. You cannot weaponize your currency, freezing assets, imposing sanctions, cutting countries off from financial systems whenever it's politically convenient, without other nations deciding they desperately need alternatives. And as the dollar's role diminishes, as it transitions from being the dominant global reserve currency holding 70% plus of reserves to being just one option among several, what happens to all those trillions of dollars currently held overseas by foreign central banks and foreign investors? Those dollars come home, they flow back into the US economy, and when they do, that creates real inflation, not the sanitized, manipulated CPI numbers the government publishes that somehow never include food, energy, housing, or anything you actually buy, but actual devastating loss of purchasing power that you feel every time you buy groceries or pay rent or fill up your gas tank or pay for healthcare. That's the environment where precious metals absolutely shine, not because they magically go up in some abstract sense, but because they maintain purchasing power, while paper currencies lose it at an accelerating rate. If silver goes from $90 to $300, while the dollar simultaneously loses 2/3 of its value, you haven't actually tripled your wealth, you've preserved it relative to the debasement. That might not sound exciting if you're looking for get-rich-quick schemes, but in a genuine currency crisis, preservation of wealth is literally everything. It's the difference between financial survival and complete devastation. Now let me address another extremely common question because I know someone's thinking it. What about Bitcoin and crypto? Why not just buy digital assets instead of physical metal? Isn't Bitcoin digital gold? Doesn't it solve all these problems? Look, I'm not here to bash cryptocurrency. I'm not some boomer who doesn't understand technology. Digital assets have their place in a diversified portfolio. They serve certain functions. Bitcoin has shown remarkable resilience and adoption over 15 years. I get it. But cryptocurrencies are not the same as physical precious metals, and treating them as interchangeable is a dangerous mistake. Bitcoin requires the internet. It requires electricity. It requires a functioning technology infrastructure. It requires working computers and online exchanges and digital wallets that don't get hacked. Silver works when the power goes out. Silver works when the internet is down. Silver works when your hardware wallet gets corrupted, or your exchange gets hacked, or the government decides to shut down cryptocurrency networks. Silver works in literally any scenario because it's a physical object that humans have recognized as valuable for 5,000 years. Also, and this is important, Bitcoin has only existed for 15 years. That's nothing. That's a blink of an eye in monetary history. Silver has been money for 5,000 years across dozens of civilizations. Bitcoin hasn't been tested through a real monetary collapse or a major world war or a prolonged global crisis where the internet itself might be compromised. Silver has been tested through all of those things, many times throughout history, and it has always retained value. Always. That track record matters enormously when you're thinking about crisis protection. I'm not saying don't own Bitcoin. I'm not saying crypto is worthless. I'm saying don't make the mistake of assuming Bitcoin replaces the need for physical hard assets. Diversification across different types of assets, some digital, some physical, some paper, some real, is the genuinely smart approach. But if you're thinking specifically about crisis protection, about true worst-case scenarios, about what survives when systems break down and institutions fail and the power grid is unstable, physical metals have a track record that literally nothing else in human history can match. Let me give you one final piece of historical context that I think is absolutely crucial for understanding where we are. In 1980, during a period of high inflation and monetary instability under Jimmy Carter, silver briefly spiked to $50 per ounce. That's a real historical fact. But here's what most people don't realize. If you adjust that $50 for real inflation, not the government's laughably manipulated CPI numbers, but actual loss of purchasing power in things like food, housing, energy, and healthcare, silver would need to be somewhere between $500 and $800 today just to match that 1980 peak. Read that again. Silver at $90 today is still dramatically below its inflation-adjusted high from 45 years ago. Despite being up 140% from recent lows, despite feeling expensive to people who only started paying attention recently, silver is actually historically cheap in real terms. That tells you two critical things. First, silver has enormous room to run if we see anything remotely resembling the monetary conditions of the late 1970s and early 1980s. Second, silver at current prices is an absolute bargain compared to what it could be worth in a genuine crisis scenario. And here's the thing that should keep you up at night. The conditions we're facing right now are in many ways far more severe than the 1970s. The debt levels are exponentially higher. The money printing is more aggressive. The geopolitical instability is arguably worse with multiple potential flashpoints. And critically, the supply-demand fundamentals for silver are much tighter because of massive industrial demand that simply didn't exist back then. So if silver hit $50 in 1980 under those conditions, what could it realistically hit now under these far more extreme conditions with far tighter fundamentals? I don't have a crystal ball. I can't give you an exact price target or timeline. But I can tell you that the math and the history strongly suggest that silver has the potential for gains that would be genuinely life-changing for people who position themselves correctly now. Not guaranteed, nothing in markets or life is guaranteed, but probable enough that it's absolutely worth taking seriously and acting on. So here's my final message to you on this Saturday, January 17th, 2026. As you think about what comes next and what you're going to do to protect yourself and your family, the dollar is losing value every single day. The currency in circulation has exploded, the debt is mathematically unpayable, the money printing will continue until the system breaks because they have no other options. Those are facts, not opinions. What you choose to do with those facts is entirely up to you. For me, holding physical silver is a meaningful part of my protection strategy. Not the entire answer to every problem, not some magic solution that eliminates all risk, but a reasonable, rational hedge against a monetary system that's showing every warning sign of late-stage instability. Silver is on sale right now, not in nominal dollar terms perhaps, but in terms of what's coming. Because when gold eventually hits $8,000 and silver hits $800, when the panic sets in and people are frantically scrambling for hard assets, when the masses finally wake up to what's happening, you won't be able to buy physical metal. The shelves will be empty. The premiums will be absolutely insane. The dealers will have nothing to sell. The opportunity will be gone forever. Right now, at this moment, you still have the chance to act while things are relatively calm. Right now, you can acquire physical metal at reasonable premiums with reasonable availability. Right now, you can position yourself before the crisis instead of scrambling during it like everyone else. That window of opportunity won't stay open forever. So educate yourself, do your own research, read about monetary history, understand both the risks and the potential rewards. Talk to people you actually trust, who have your best interests at heart. Make your own informed decisions based on your own unique situation and goals. But whatever you do, don't ignore this. Don't pretend the dollar is fine just because that's psychologically easier. Don't assume the system will somehow magically fix itself. Don't wait until it's too late and then wonder why nobody warned you. I'm warning you right now. William Lee is warning you. And if you want to keep getting these reality checks from someone who rebelled against the financial elite and actually tells you the truth, hit that subscribe button. Because the establishment doesn't want you hearing any of this. The markets might be closed today for your convenience, but the monetary debasement isn't. The dollar is losing value right this second, and silver, real, physical, tangible silver that you can hold in your hand, is gaining value. Not on a computer screen, in reality. The only question is whether you're going to recognize that reality and act on it while you still can, or whether you're going to look back years from now financially devastated, wishing desperately that you had listened. The choice is yours. Choose wisely.